All right. Well, thanks for tuning into another episode of the Why Influence podcast. Today we have an awesome guest. Her name is Elsie Escobar. She is the co-founder and co-host of She Podcasts. Podcasts is a conference focused around helping women get their voices out there on a large level. Last year is hosted in Atlanta. I'm not sure if every year is in Atlanta. And then the podcast itself has over 270 episodes. But it doesn't stop there. She's been podcasting since, I believe, 2006. You can correct me. And you're the co-host and producer of The Feed, which is a podcast for Libsyn, a large podcasting host. You're also a podcast with a couple other shows, including a yoga show. Anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today to come on here and share with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I so appreciate to be here.
Sure. I'm sure I didn't include everything and maybe the most relevant things. So, do you mind giving a quick 2 to 3 sentence elevator pitch about what your platforms are all about right now?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to speak into who I am in the podcasting space because it's a little bit it's a little bit different. So my thing, the stake that I claim on the ground is that I drive dialogue and podcasting in the podcasting industry, focusing on podcast impact on society and diversity and culture, as well as their power to drive social change. So I am one of the only female pundits, analysts in the podcasting space that is still out there. So anytime that you read about podcasting news or podcasting analysis or any of that stuff, it's primarily coming from the voice of a man. And women are still very underrepresented, particularly in any kind of the leadership positions. So I kind of have put my stake on the ground and speak up about those things. In addition to obviously having my podcast, and yes, I am, I co-run She Podcast, that community now. That is, we now have over 16,000 women in our group, and we have a conference that goes along with it. And it's not always in Atlanta. Atlanta was it was our first choice, first year choice there, and it was picked because it was the closest to me.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I've
yeah.
seen a lot of the work that you do, and you're definitely making a big positive impact. And I didn't know the number, but 16,000 people in your group.
Yep, and it's very specific because we're very obviously it's women and female identifying in the group only. And the other thing that we have as well is that the whole point is that it's a podcasters group. So if you are planning on launching a show or you have an existing show, you have a place in our group. We do not open it up to companies and service providers. I mean, if there are some in the group, it's because they also have a podcast. So that's also
Right.
something that's very unique about our group.
Yeah, I like that. And actually, the last guest I had on the show here, Jeffrey Tobias Halter, he's a keynote speaker. So it's a man talking about women's rights and helping women in the workplace. So it's awesome to have 2 episodes in a row where we're pushing for some women's rights here.
Yay! All the time.
Right. Do you mind sharing a positive? As a result of sharing, you can a lot of times impact people in ways you didn't expect. Do you mind sharing an unintended consequence that you've received either recently or just something that comes to mind for somebody that you've impacted?
Yeah, I think it actually came from my very first podcast. And this isn't an unusual thing, but it really was like, what? I did start with a yoga podcast, and it is still up. It's called Elsie's Yoga Class. It is, it doesn't have the best of audio. I mean, come on, y'all. I started in 2006. And the whole premise of that show was to record me teaching classes, live classes. So I was not teaching to the people that were to listen. I was teaching to the people who were in my classes at that time, because that's what I was doing full time in 2006. And the unintended circumstances of that is that I got not just one, but about 3 emails from people who had been listening to my show or to my classes and practicing along with me, who had decided to not end their lives. And that was
Wow.
something that was really like mind blowing to me, that my voice was able to help somebody continue living.
So you're sharing the classes that you're doing live in person because that's what your career was
Hmm.
online on your podcast, and you received not just one but three emails of people that said that your podcast helped them decide that they wanted to keep living.
Hmm.
Wow,
Yep.
that's powerful.
Yep. And I've had, and lots of other people would email me. You changed my life. It's because of you that I did this and this and this. And so that has really been quite an incredible experience. And there's, and that's really hard to swallow sometimes, that it's, you still kind of want to take that off you, like, and say like,
Right.
oh, that's not me. That wasn't me. I mean, thank you. That's great. But not really, because it's so big. It's so big to let something like that in. And um, we also undercut, I think, with She Podcast Live. That was something that was truly, I possibly one of the, I guess, an unintended circumstance of where we started our group. Right, it's an online group. It's just like, I mean, obviously, we feel it's the best group in the whole entire world, but it's a Facebook group. You know what I mean? Everybody has an experience with a Facebook group at some point. And having this conference that our women decided to back, like it wasn't we decided and we hoped people show up. They actually did show up. When they did show up, it was as if they had always known each other, and that really shook me. It was very unbelievable, by the feeling that was present in that conference, that I have never felt anywhere before, of women that felt at home, that they felt safe, that they felt they could be themselves, that they felt, and the biggest comment that we got is that there was no feeling of hierarchy, that everybody was the same, that we had keynote speakers and we had session leaders and we had attendees and we had sponsors, and everybody was on the same playing field. Like there was no, it was all the same. And I think that really brought me to tears of wow, this is unbelievable that this has happened, because I never imagined that the quality, the quantitative feeling of being surrounded by something so unique that they created. And I think that that's another thing. Yes, Jess and I put this together as like it was an idea and it's the brand, if you will, but
Right.
that now it lives on its own in this thing that is She Podcast. Like She Podcast, it's its own thing. And I never thought it would do that. Like I didn't even know that was a thing. Who knew? I would not have thought about that. So um,
Right.
it is. And so what our women feel is that She Podcasts, it's ours. And that's beautiful.
It is. Yeah. And so I haven't been to She Podcasts, but I have been to several podcast conferences, and I can say that they're very different than going to a YouTube conference or a Twitch conference, because I've been to
Mhm.
those as well. The people are just very humble and very authentic and vulnerable. So like every person you talk to, they could be the smallest or biggest podcaster, but you're going to have like an intimate conversation, like you've known the person forever. So I'm sure that a more intimate version of that and focus more on women is even more heightened in those things.
Yeah, it's amazing.
All right. So, before we jump into, why you started all this and how you got to where you are, I'd like to give some advice to some of the listeners here today. You're surrounded by tons of podcasters, and then you built a successful Facebook group that sort of became its own thing, and then a conference just sort of happened as a result of all that. So if let's say someone wants to start a movement, which is sort of what you did there, what would be some of the biggest advice that you could give to someone who's trying to start a movement and whatever it is that they're passionate about?
You have to really start with, this is something I teach all the time, your mission and vision and values. You have to sit and really ponder what those are for yourself, particularly your values. Because if you don't do that, the choices that you're going to be presented with, as simple as maybe what platform should I go with, or what my business model is going to be, all of those things are going to be answered by the work that you do at the beginning, which is, what is your essence, like what really is the core of your being, and what are the values that you choose to live in into this world. What are you willing to champion? What are the things that really resonate with you? What are the things that you don't resonate with? um, we, all of those things are by far the most important as you start to build anything, because it's that it's the living of them that is going to call the right people to your conference or to your business or to your podcast. And you must stand for something. You must. Because if you are wishy-washy, or you are just deciding that you want to reach a specific demographic, and therefore you put on the right words, the right copy, the right colors of your brand that tends to appeal to said market, you will never be able to really actually reach it, because it's not coming from a grounded space. And also, things are not going to be particularly easy. And there's a lot of times when things are going to be really hard and tedious and mundane and not creative and scary. And if you can't rely on those values to go back to as to why you're doing what you're doing and what your mission is in the world and how you can convey that, you're not going to be fueled up. You're
Right.
going to give it up.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, and I see that time and time again. I mean, the premise of the podcast is deep diving into why people are doing it, because these are people that are, have a strong enough why that they've driven through to become somebody that has the capacity to influence a community or group. So, coming up with the mission, the vision, and the values is definitely something I would agree with spending a lot of time on.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you had clear early on, or is that something that sort of evolves over time? Or do you mind going into that a little bit?
Oh, no, it actually does evolve. And I think that part of it is that for me, it wasn't something that I named. So it wasn't like I go, I'm going to do my mission and vision and values. Like I didn't start off with an exercise. Like I didn't start with something outside of myself. One thing that I was gifted to very early on, I think it was possibly, just internal, something about me as a human. Ever since I was little, I've always been incredibly idealistic and innovative and rebellious in the things that I love. And I also really knew myself very clearly. And I happened to have always made choices that kind of went against the grain, that weren't quite like everybody else. I also had a very big sense of like being alone. Like I really relish in being by myself. I'm not particularly. I don't really need people's approval in a lot of different ways. So I kind of just always did my own thing and made my own choices. And I started to realize that that really drove me to get to where I ended up in a lot of different ways. Like I paid for my own schooling. I went to a Jesuit university. I worked two jobs and paid for it. My parents didn't have to pay for any of that kind of stuff. I got accepted into a master's program that was literally three women and five men a year is what was the only thing that was accepted. And so I never went for this. Like, it's not like I wanted to do this. It's just that I just moved from a sense of like, this seems cool. I want to do that. And then when I did
Right.
that, I committed to it. And then I actually achieved them. So there was a part, it's not like things just happened. I actually achieved these things. And then in retrospection, as I, grew up into maybe my mid 30s, I then looked back and I started to see that one of the reasons why there was success, in quote, in the things that I did succeed in is because there was something tying them together, which was this movement from, this is my essence. This is who I am in the world. This is what I stand for. And I started to put names onto what those qualities were as I continued to make my choices. And the older I got and the more data I had, because I've moved from so many different like gosh, I've had so many careers, I guess, I've like taught yoga. I've been a professional actor. I've waited tables for 10 years. I mean, there's just so many different things. I do podcasting now. I did a conference. Like, there's just so many layers to what I've done to make money in the world. That's never been a 9 to 5
Right.
that I looked back and people asked, and actually it was because of podcasting or because of being on podcasts when people would ask me that question, like, how did you move from doing this to doing this, as if I had a plan. And I'm like, well, and then I started to think back onto it, and the paths to from one step to the next came from, again, those core missions, that core value system that leads the choices that I make. And that's where it came from. And it does become iterative. So you let go of some things, you let go of labels, you let go of certain values. Maybe those things aren't necessarily what you're really aiming at. You grow up in the same way that you would with anything else. You realign, but the point is that you ask the questions again and again.
Right.
Anytime you come back, you got to recheck, is this still true? Is
Yeah,
this still true? And if it's not, there's nothing wrong with that. You just realign again. Where are we going now?
I like that. So, when you started your podcast, the yoga podcast, was that the first time that you sort of intentionally shared on a larger level, or where was the beginnings? I guess for you, if it wasn't that.
I think it was I think acting would probably do it, right? So
Oh, okay.
being on stage in front of lots of people is sharing. So yeah, that was possibly my first step was in taking the stage and being in front of people. And at that point, um, giving voice to other people's words, right? It wasn't really, I mean, obviously it was me, but I was acting. I was putting on these other characters and giving them voice, embodying them,
So how
embodying
long did
voice.
you do that or acting?
Oh gosh, since probably from when I was in high school, because that's when I started doing it. And then I think my last proper job was in 2002.
Okay.
And then yeah, and then I did another stint in theater in like 2007. That was probably my last professional gig was 2007. I was on at the Arizona Theater Company. But um yeah, so I did it for quite a while, and that taught me a lot, obviously. And
Right.
then the next stage was probably, I would say, the my yoga classes, my physical yoga classes. I happened to have been in LA in at that time as well when I was doing the acting thing, and it's when yoga was really starting to come up. So I had a lot of students in my classes. I probably during the day in a given day, if I had 3 or 4 classes or so, I would probably teach anywhere from 50 to upwards of 100 people a day. So
Wow.
I also had a lot of I had a lot of students. I had a lot of students. And so weekly, I would say, yeah, somewhere around, gosh, 500. I would say about 500 people a week that I taught yoga to. And again, this is like I was teaching 13 to 15 public classes a week. That did not include the private clients that I had. So I had a lot of reach at that time.
Wow. So
And
how long did you do yoga like that before starting the podcast?
I started teaching yoga in 2002, and I started my podcast in 2006. So I had already kind of built a little bit of an audience, which was helpful when I launched, right? Because when I launched, I didn't think like, "Ooh, I'm going to reach all of these people." I actually did it to reach my own people because they were asking me at that time. Sometimes they would comment, "Hey, I wish we could take you with you. We're going take you with us. We're heading over to whatever. I'm going on a trip, or I'm getting this, or I wish you would, and I wish I could have you with me." And I would just always laugh. It was like, "Oh, that's funny." And then when podcasting came around, I was like, well, maybe I could just record my classes, and then that way they can get them. Like I was thinking of my own students. and saying like, you guys, well, you can come to my class, but if you don't have access, you can take me with you, like you've been asking. And that's how it started.
Okay. And when you started it, you just started sharing with the people coming that, hey, I've got this podcast, or did you have
Mhm.
this 4 years of contacts that you sort of launched it to when you went live with it too?
Oh yeah, no. I learned all the things at the same time. Like I got a website up, like a WordPress.com website, just like as an in quote blog, right? Yeah. So I started listening to podcasts. I learned about all the stuff that you needed, right? You need a website, you need an RSS feed, and I was like, I don't even know what these things are. So
Right.
I started to learn. I mean, there was really, like at that time, I was just teaching yoga and waiting tables. I mean, whenever I had a free time, I would just learn these new things. So I started to study up. Like I got a book on RSS. That was the first thing I did was I bought the For Dummies. What is RSS? It was a great book. It actually broke things down so well that I was like, oh yeah, because I thought that was the hardest concept of when people were talking about it. I did not get the RSS piece. But when I got this book, I totally got it right away. And I was like, I'm smarter than most people now. Um, and so I just did what the people, like literally what the people I was listening to said. Go get a website. Here's a free way to do it. Get a host. This is how you do it. You record using these things, because at that time everybody was using oh gosh, I forgot the name of it. The iRiver, that's what it is. It was a little MP3 player, really
Okay.
tiny little thing. It looked like a Toblerone, like chocolate bar, really small pieces, like 3 pieces of it.
Nice.
And that's what I used to record my class with. I used to have a little lav mic that I would still, it was like a $30 Sony lavalier, and I would stick it into that. And I would wrap the little iRiver on my arm, and I would go record my classes, and I would just kind of put those on. And I started blogging a little bit. I still didn't even know what that was. I was like, I didn't understand why people would want to read my stuff, because it seemed like it was like at that time it seemed like it was a diary, right? Like you're just journaling to people, and I didn't understand what that was about, because why would anybody want to read this? But I decided to, go ahead and give it a go. A Twitter came into the scene as well. It was really huge in podcasting in 2006. So I was like, what is this Twitter thing? And I signed up for Twitter, and I kind of made friends right away, because there weren't very many people on the platform at that time.
Right.
So I started to sort of get a little bit of a momentum. I was unusual enough to call attention to the scene. Most of these new tech things are historically like white men with money, possibly in their late 40s. I don't know, but I mean, that's what seemed to happen. It was just all guys. And so when I showed up, and here's like this woman, and she's podcasting, and she's a yoga teacher. What? So there were all of these weird things that were very unusual about me, which called attention at that time. And so I got more attention, and I kind of stepped into it.
Yeah.
I kind of worked off of it, and I really enjoyed the podcasting space. I mean, I really, really, really enjoyed it. And so it wasn't like I was trying to achieve anything. It was
So
just my people right away.
right. So you started your podcast because you had this group of 500 people per week that you were teaching yoga to, and people wanted it on the go. So how did your why evolve from there? Because your why to start out with sort of sharing on a large level online with podcasting was to give people access to your yoga classes. So like you evolved into growing into She podcasts, and you're doing the podcast for Libsyn. So like, how does the whole journey sort of tie together with like the bigger vision? Because we talked about how your values and vision can sort of evolve over time, and I think it'll be interesting to hear how that worked out for you.
Yeah, it's two-sided. One of them is I'll give you the technological side as well. That I really truly fell in love with the technology of podcasting and the power of audio. Like I just really truly fell in love with it. So I I was I really love that, and I love the artistic side of it. Meaning, that I felt podcasters were very much like the theater people because there's Hollywood and then there's theater, right? And then there's regional theater, which is a whole other thing. So all of these little subcultures to me, podcasters tended to really resonate with the original or the regional theater experience that I've had, which was really about the craft of acting, wonderful plays, conveying humanity to other people, telling these incredible stories, having like transformation happen just by the sharing of these of this, right? Like I had viscerally felt that while I listened to podcasts, and also was really just very optimistic about the medium itself. So I was really active with it. And I also became incredibly loving of things tech. Like Apple became huge for me. Everything Apple became huge for me. I was just like immense in technology and saw the potential of what that was. So I really wanted to tap into what that was. The
Okay.
other side of it is the fact that coming back to wrapping up my why, if you will, or my biggest thing, is that voice to me is the underlying thing that has been present, and it's what drives me since I was little all the way to now, and I'm still working on it. And that means being able to speak out into the world, to own your words, the actual physical manifestation of language coming out of your mouth out into the world. Because I was not empowered as a child to speak my mind, nor to speak up for any reason. And not necessarily that my parents were mean or bad or anything like that. It's just that I come from a staunch Latin American culture, that isn't historically known for empowering little girls to step out and do their thing. And I was already a very, 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 very shy little girl. So if you told me not to speak up, that's possibly one of the easiest things that I was going to do anyway. I'm not going to speak up. So, what ended up happening is as I grew up, I was not given the skill set to stand up for myself, to verbalize when things were not okay. And this is, I'm not talking about a platform. I'm talking about just, interpersonal communications. And I made horrible choices in my life. And I also felt completely disempowered. And again, going back to the skill set, it's like anything else that you do in your life. You have to do it to get better at it. And anytime that I had something to say that mattered to me, that was important to me, that I felt was that I needed to speak up about, the minute that I opened my mouth, my body kind of betrayed me in a way because I started to cry. My throat got really, constricted and I couldn't speak. Uh, and then all of a sudden it became about, oh my gosh, Elsie's crying. Oh, let's either quiet her down or, oh my God, she's crying. How could she be crying? So I was dismissed either through love and engagement when people patted me on the back. And this is like as a grown up too, and said everything's going to be okay. Or I was just like, oh, she's just an emotional person, when you never actually heard what I had to say because I never got it out. I wasn't looking for somebody to coddle me. I was I was unskilled in being able to speak emotionally or about things that mattered. And
Wow.
so in the process, I saw that acting was huge for this because I was given words to say out loud, and that helped me practice. So other people were saying possibly things that I wanted to say at some point in my life, but I was given this like fake time to practice, right? Scenes that I had to play out and words that somebody else more eloquently said. And I that started to give me the ability to do that. Doing the same thing in yoga. Yoga classes were very instrumental, taking the seat of the teacher and having to articulate some very, very deep themes that I always taught with from my teachers that really influenced who I was as a human, and being able to then essentially preach to the people that came to my classes and then help them get into their bodies. So people really resonated with the themes around how I taught yoga, not just the classes themselves. Um, Waiting tables also was a very huge platform for me because you have to go talk to people, countless people. You have to serve them. You have to ask, you have to learn how to speak to them, you have to weigh in how they're feeling. You have to be very calm, usually calm, to be able to, assuage if at any time they're getting upset over something. So that also really empowered me, being able to speak. And again, it's not like I was speaking about myself, but there were things I had to say and they were given to me. And then
Right.
when podcasting came into the mix, it was the same thing. I had an opportunity to be behind the microphone. It kind of gave me the training wheels. That's how I like to look at it when you start to record. It gives you the training wheels to be able to say the things that matter when it matters. And so when you talk about platform, for me, it's like, yeah, there's platform, but I think the most important platform is like the people that you need to be talking to in your life, telling them the important things that they need to hear.
Right.
Your family, your significant other, your mom and dad, people who are making choices that are killing themselves, my children. Like those people are the ones I want to reach above and beyond. And I'm still using my platform as a way to train me to do that when the time really matters, because that's what really counts. So, in all of my work, if I can empower you to do that, I've done my job. So whether you listen to me in yoga, whether you listen to me here in this podcast, whether you work with me as a, podcast strategies, whether you hire me as your yoga teacher, whatever it is, how I work, and or as a consultant, well, it has nothing to do with this. I will always bring this conversation to the table. It'll always be part of how I work. This like is the how like the power of your voice, and whether or not I see it in the world or I don't. I see the disconnects. And
Yeah.
whenever when I just was actually talking to a woman who has this um lovely podcast that is about sleeping. Like she has like a meditation type thing that she's doing with her show, and she's doing very, very well. And it's a really lovely show. Like I think my daughter's going to really love it, helping people go to sleep. It's a lovely crafted show. She's done a wonderful thing. But then in looking at her online footprint, what I'm missing and that she finally got when we talked is that the bridge between her podcast and her audience is missing. We often forget that people can't just listen to our stuff. We have to invite them in. We have to allow that our digital presence, like what you are listening to me here, is also imprinted in every part of where you are online. And it doesn't mean that you have to publish, social media stuff. It just means that your bio has to be spot on. Your imagery, like the way that you present yourself into the world, think about that. You don't have to change it every time, but how do you want that image to land for somebody where they know who you are by just a glimpse, 6 seconds looking at your Twitter profile? Do they get who you are just through that? And do they go, "Ooh, I like that person," or "Ooh, I don't like that person"? That's what we want. We
Right.
want to evoke something. And a
So
lot of us have a disconnect there.
yeah, yeah, that's amazing. So before moving on I just wanted to revisit what you were just talking about, which I think is really powerful because you talked about how as a child and growing up, you were passionate about trying to get your voice out, but you couldn't speak. And when you tried to speak, sometimes you would, break down to crying because you couldn't get the words out or articulate what you're trying to say. And then people misinterpreted that. So then the choices that you made were all geared towards that deep level of passion. And it's clear that, how everything ties together with how you explain that, because you had your acting career where someone gives you the words to say so you don't have to think about them. And then you've got your yoga classes where you get practice teaching and preaching to people. Then you start waiting tables and you have to talk to people and serve them. And that's all speaking practice. And then podcasting, obviously, is just a whole nother step to that. But your deep level of passion is being able to articulate and get your voice out there, and that's grown to help others, overcome those barriers and to get their voices out there. And that's sort of where She Podcast dives in.
Hmm.
So that's a really amazing journey, and just I want to say congratulations for getting this far in that.
Oh, thank you. That was nice to see that whole thing. You
uh, because a lot of times I'll ask the guests like, what barriers did you have to overcome, and how did you overcome them? And you just sort of went through everything right there for me. I didn't have to say anything.
It's well, yeah, I saw that question when you sent your list too, and part of it is that I'm still doing that. It's I'm not by any means good at. I mean, yes, I am good at some things. Yes, I do take onus of the fact that there are some things that I'm really good at, right? And one of them is now like in podcasting, like I'm great at this kind of talking and uh, all of that stuff, but I'm still working at the interpersonal stuff. I'm still working at being able to explain my deepest feelings in a way that isn't highly charged and emotional. I'm still working at finding the right words at the right time. Um, I'm
So
still
so
articulating that with, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's good. So then, what are some things that you're doing now that we talked about a lot of your journey of getting to where you are today, and now you're trying to be better at being more vulnerable and more capable of articulating feelings or things that you're trying to portray. So, like, what are some things that now that you're this far in your journey that you see as like actions that you're taking and steps that you're taking to self development further?
I think I'm stepping into the biggest and most challenging thing is kind of like what you alluded to when you kind of shared about your journey a little bit before we started recording, that it's stepping into a position. It's what I saw when you said that is that it's not necessarily about being seen and more of a platform, but stepping into a position of leadership to
Okay,
actually own that.
and that's what the She
Because,
podcast for you.
yeah, but also it's anywhere really. It's like nobody's going to, especially women, nobody's going to brand you a leader.
Right.
The world tends to overlook it. It's like a byproduct. Unfortunately, that's what happens. And if there's like a woman leader, it's like one. you know, that one lady, remember her? And it's like it's that one name keeps coming up all the time. Well, there's so and so, right? Same name over and over. So part of my realization is that I started to mentor a lot of what I consider women leaders. And I thought, I would look at them and I would feel, oh my God, they are amazing. I can totally help them be better. And so I created this mentorship experience that was based on the fact that I thought it was unfair that they were not getting as much eyes and ears to their work because I thought it was brilliant. And in the process of doing that, it was reflected back to me that I was in a position of leadership and that I needed to take up that space and that I needed to essentially crown myself as somebody who leads, that I am an expert. And I had to say it and own it and write it. So that was huge and it was scary because that means you have a lot more responsibility. So I recognize that when I speak, I'm not just speaking Elsie's mind, but sometimes I have to speak about things that I don't feel comfortable speaking about because I'm the one that has access to the door. I'm the one that has access to open the door. I'm the one that has access to be asked to go into a room.
Hmm.
And therefore, I am standing up for all of these other voices. I am the only one that's there to do that at first. And that's been a huge responsibility. So and it's still a challenge. So how do I handle that? I write things. I sit down and I get very clear about the words I use to describe myself. I also get very clear about the things that I write because when I write something, it matters and it holds a lot more than just me. So, when I tweet something out, like of course I tweet things out like that are random, of course. But when it comes to making like a statement about podcasting, I'm very mindful of what I write because it is reflective not only of me and my integrity, but the women that look to me as a leader. I'm speaking up for them as well. And so it's huge. So for me, writing it down first is number one, and number two is speaking it aloud. You have to speak it aloud. So when I was telling you in terms of leadership, and when you were saying me like, how do you introduce yourself, like, or whatever that you're asking me, like, one of the things that I have to always remember is that I have to own to the bigness of the achievements that I have done in a way that isn't like shy. And it starts with your name. It starts with saying your name. My name is Elsie Escobar, and take up that space, because I got feedback from the feed, I would say about 2 years in to that. I had somebody email me and, say how awesome the show was and all this stuff. And they were like, I didn't even know what your name was, because when you introduced the show, you skim over your name and I can't hear what you're saying. And I realized that in conversation, when I first started that show, I was taking a back seat. I was thinking people didn't want to know my name. Like, this was not conscious. This was super unconscious. And it still happens when I meet people live. When I meet people for the first time, I go, my name is Elsie Escobar. Or I think, like, I'm not going to say my name really aloud. Like, why would anybody want to hear my name? And I realized I was doing that. I also realized that anytime there was some bigger thought in that show, I always gave it to Rob, because I was like, he can talk about that. And I was doing this totally subconsciously. And I realized, hey, I have an opinion about this too. But I wasn't giving myself permission to give my own opinion. And because it doesn't come naturally, what I started to do is, if we covered something that was important to me, like that really mattered, a story that really mattered to me, I would outline it and have my notes on the side, because it's like an interview. It's not an interview show, but it's like very easygoing. We have show notes and stuff like that, but we usually just go through stuff. But if something really mattered, I would outline it and write down. Sometimes I would script it out, because, like I said, my biggest challenges are finding the right words at the right time when it matters. In podcasting, it's great because you can script it.
Right.
I'm like, I want these 2 points to really land. And so I did. And I started to work at it that way. Now it's so much easier. I mean, mind you, we've been out since 2013. And I say that, I would think that maybe 2.5, 3 years in there is when I had that realization for myself.
To give yourself permission to have your own opinion.
Yeah. And to own my name, and to be like, I'm the boss of that show. I am the boss of that show. I started to change it and say, like, I am the producer of this show. And so it's like, I don't know why. It's like I denounced myself to the giggling sidekick. And that was my choice. Nobody said that to me. So it's just all of those things when you realize, wow, I just have to claim it. So that's been the biggest thing that I've done.
That's huge. Thanks for sharing that. I just want to reiterate a point to listeners here is just, you can't really compare, we've had this said on here from previous guests, but you can't compare your chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. And you can see how Elsie's path has started where she was just trying to self-develop to even speak and articulate, and it started with acting and yoga, and now she's gotten to a point where she's giving herself permission to own and level up, but that's not something you can do overnight. So it's not like you could be who you were back then, Elsie, where you were struggling with speaking, to be somewhere where you're owning your name, owning your thoughts. Like it takes practice and takes constant self-development, and I think it's amazing how far you've come in your journey. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. And I think you nailed it, because you do have to practice. I started this journey when I was, in my mid-20s, and I had so many emotional issues, or my own, even then, Even now, I'm saying even now too, I have some of that stuff, but not as bad as I did when I was younger. And so when I was in my mid 20s, there was so much going on. I don't think I could hold at that time. One of my yoga teachers, it's very interesting, the process of yoga, the process of practicing, because that's really what yoga is yoking yourself to yourself. That's the definition that I abide to. And part of it is that there's a moment when you as a teacher impart a student with the teachings, and sometimes it's the body, sometimes it's the mind, sometimes it's a whole thing. But there comes a point when the capacity for holding the information or the energy is finally there. And that's when you take it to the next level. That's when your discipleship or your learning has moved to the next level. You cannot go back when you hit that. You can't
Right.
undo it. But when you're starting out, there's a point there where your capacity to hold it is not ready yet. The vessel isn't ready for the next step. So even if you got all of the information and said, here, do these things and you will get whatever, your capacity is not there yet. So you have to, sometimes it's just time. It's
Yeah. The stepping
time.
stones and
Yep.
practice.
Mm-hmm. And then one day you'll be like, oh, like this. And then the teacher will nod. you know, you are correct. And
Right.
that's when you keep going.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing the journey. So a request I've had oftentimes from listeners is just, people that influence can make money in different ways. So if you don't mind sharing, it could be from a very high level. But, ever since you started, sharing on a large level, it sounds like, now you've got your conference, you do speaking events, you've got your podcasts. So do you mind sharing just, maybe sources of income for somebody that's like in your shoes, so that maybe it can spark ideas for people thinking about the visions for what it is that they're trying to do?
Yeah, I still have a very diverse pool of income coming into into me. So there are a vast amount, and then I think skills are the ones that I started to make money with first. Skill sets, meaning delivering product or delivering services for things like, so that would be very specific, like editing, like podcast editing. Like I did that way back in the day, where I was able to process people's audio and do things that other people didn't know how to do. And it could have been as simple as, I need to have an intro and an outro added to this piece of audio, or I remember way back in the day, I would get people panicking because there was a part in the middle there that they needed to take out, and they didn't know how to do that. And I was like, send it over.
Right.
And at first I was doing it for free, and then I started asking for money, or people actually started giving me money for things like that. So that was like basic stuff. I developed a skill set for so much in the online space. Editing images, uploading things, like publishing blog posts. I learned WordPress. I learned Squarespace. I managed those social media, like all of those different things are skill sets that I built just from engaging it. And I didn't realize that those were things people would pay for. So I did a lot of that stuff. I've sold, like Jess and I have tried every single model of things. We sold digital products. We sold a large ticket. Way back in the day, we had podcasting school for women, which may at some point come back. But it's been so long. Like, so we put that out, like I think in 2014. And we sold that for a couple of years. We also did like webinars, like we would do a free month of every month. We had a free webinar with an expert or with ourselves, and we would make it, for everybody. And then we sold that webinar as a digital product afterwards for very low, like, anything from like $9 to, I think our most expensive one was like $20 for the free webinar. We just turned it into a digital product. Right now we're doing more of the Patreon model, but we're starting to up level it to a more proper membership site kind of thing happening right now. But we've gone through so many different things. We said no to stuff. We've done half a day workshops. We've done full day workshops, which we've been paid for, which was awesome, right? So we cut a deal with the conference where they would go like, you guys come in. And one of the reasons that we had that is because if Jess and Elsie are going to be there, then we could bring our people, right? That was the whole point. Like if we were going to be there, people will show up. So that's bankable sometimes as well. And my God, I taught yoga. I mean, I still have a yoga client, a one-on-one yoga client that I still work with. I've been working with him since, my God, my littlest one is 8. I think I was pregnant when I started to work with him. And I still see him because I go to Pittsburgh once in a while. Like I don't live there, but my husband's family is there. And every time I go into Pittsburgh, we do a session together and I still work with him. So I still do that. And I've consulted now I'm getting paid for my brain. So now it's a higher it's higher paying tier for working with me because of the experience that I have and the influence that I have in this space. So those are some things like tapping into my brain now is my most expensive. It's the part that's like the most expensive of what I can offer, right?
Right.
And so that's where my prices have actually gone to. And so so consultant, strategist, that kind of stuff is where I am at the moment. And I also work for Lipson. So that is my job. And in that respect too, I also make money there, but it doesn't stop there. That money is, it's at home. So I work from home and I'm like their community leader, if you will, their community manager of all things communication with podcasters. And I have all kinds of things happening at the same time and in my job title there.
Nice. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. I wasn't aware of a lot of those that you worked on.
Yeah. There's so much all the time. And what's interesting is that it never, this is one thing I'm really super excited about is that I never know when I'm going to get a random check from somebody. Like now people just pay me for things. And I know that sounds really weird and like very like, oh, well, good for you, lady.
Right.
But it's like most people, it's like, I didn't realize that there's so many things that I know how to do that people can actually pay me for. Like I wasn't aware, but you first have to get over the mindset that number one, it's worth it to be paid for it. And the other aspect of it is that you also need to really be aware of your worth. So one thing that was really hard for me when I first started was charging for an hourly rate, if you will, for my expertise, because I was afraid. I had, imposter syndrome. I was afraid that, this is too much. Like, what am I thinking? I don't think this is, come on, that kind of stuff. And I always thought like people would ask me to send them a quote or how much are you hourly? And I was always like, oh my God, that was like the worst question I could ever get.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know how to even say it. I was so embarrassed and so like, I don't know if I should put this. No, I don't know if I should say that. Maybe I shouldn't do that. No, that's too much. Maybe it should be. And I would second guess myself for like days of anxiety. And there came a point, and again, it only came from years of being into this now, because now I'm going to have my 14th year in podcasting here at the mid July. And now I know, I totally am super confident in what you're going to get from me. Like, I guarantee it. If you don't get it, I'll give you your money back, because I know you'll get it. I know my worth. So This is how much it is, because you'll get something out of it. But I also know, I know the going rate, and I also know the value. I know the value that I'm offering and how much you're going to get out of it.
Yeah, that's huge. And I've seen people go through that transition. I haven't really gone through that myself. Most of my experiences just been spending time and effort on my own businesses and my own podcasts. But I have seen a lot of people go through the imposter syndrome for, when they're trying to increase their rates for what they are worth. And It never appears to be easy.
No, it takes time. Again, it's just like you have to sit with it. Like it's truth. It's hard truth time to go into your gut and and for me it's about the guarantee. Like what is it? What's the tangible deliverability for this? And the other thing is that I'm also really particular about who my clients are, which is why I have like a little bit of a questionnaire when you work with me. Because if you send me your questionnaire and I ask you deliberately, what do you expect to get? Like, what are you looking for? And if you can't articulate, or you say something like, I want to grow my like I want like more downloads per month, and I want to work 2 hours a week, whatever. I can like say, okay, there's a disconnect here of your expectations. And I'm very clear. And I go, you know what? I don't know if I can deliver in what you're asking. I'm not going to take you on.
Right.
I can tell you can go to these people because that's how they work. I don't work that way.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
I send them to the appropriate person. So, and I'm very clear about that. If it's beyond the scope of my expertise and I cannot deliver, I will straight up tell you I can't work with you. Not because I don't want to, but because your expectations are this, and I think that you would be better served working with this person. So
makes sense. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. That's an awesome detailed list of things that you've done and that you're working on now. So I think that's helpful for people starting out to see that, okay, well, I can learn basic podcast editing and offer it for free until someone starts paying me, and at least it gets me into the door, and then maybe I can, after doing that for a while, feel more comfortable doing my own podcast. And there's a lot of stepping stones that come out from how people approach things, and it was helpful hearing just sort of your journey with where the sources came from. So thanks.
you're welcome.
So we're running a little bit low on time. So before I open the floor for you to sort of shout out how people can come and find you and where they can connect with you, do you have any last words for the listeners here today? Knowing the type of listeners that we have with the podcast.
Sorry, I had like my girl like interrupted me while you were just finishing that. I am so sorry. Can you please repeat your question?
Yeah. So do you have any last words for our listeners here today? People that maybe are struggling to go as big as possible with their voice. Have any of the last words or biggest pieces of advice that you want to leave them with?
I think the biggest piece of advice is just to spend the time to doing the inner work is, I think, one of the hardest things. That anytime you level up, anytime that you take that bigger step, if you don't deal with the unknowns or the things that you don't want to look at or clarify for yourself, they become magnified whenever you step into the next level. They are a bigger issue because then you have to deal with it. And yeah, that's one of I think if I could say anything, it would be that. Look at your own stuff now, spend the time to make sure that you find out what you really stand for, who you are, what you're willing to do, who you are in the world, what you'll say no to and what you will say yes to in a micro level, because once you step and get bigger, it'll be bigger, and you will be asked to step up. And yeah, man, falling from grace is not a good thing. So it's, yeah. And now our world is going to be demanding that you take a stand, whether you want to or not. So you have to be ready for that. There is no running away from a lot of things. People, everybody's getting better at speaking up, and you are going to be called out when there are mistakes made. And it's not that you suck. It means that you made a mistake. Everybody makes mistakes. But the best way that I have learned to is, when I've made mistakes, it's to be able to deal with it face on, head on, breathe it in, and atone from a place of truth.
Awesome. So you hear that, spend time doing the inner work and be ready to take a stand, because if you're not called on yet, you're going to get called on. And also, to make a larger impact, you're going to have have an opinion. So just stand behind that opinion. All right. Well, Elsie, thanks so much for coming on the show today. What's the best way for somebody to connect with you? What's your preferred method for if someone got a lot of value out of this episode and they want to just send you a nice message saying, I enjoyed, this is what I heard. What's the best way for people to get a hold of you, and where do you want to direct people? And of course, I'll put links to everything in the show notes of this episode.
Well, thank you. I think that right now I'm most active on Twitter, and I'm at the Elsie Escobar on there. I think that that's probably the best place to go. Everything else is, listening to my podcast is a way to connect, but I am the most active on Twitter. That's the most public place that I'm in. I really love Instagram, but unfortunately, I'm bandwidth poor here where I live. And every time I open that app, I can't get anything to load. So I just quit. But Twitter is easy. It's text. It's fast. And I can respond so much better there. And from then on, you can, I'll share all of my things usually on Twitter is the most accessible place for me.
Awesome. And thanks so much for being vulnerable and sharing at such a deep level with us here today.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks so much for your show. I mean, I'm sure that it's inspiring a lot of people, and keep going at it.
Thanks. And before I let you go, I like to ask for some feedback. And, when we first started this conversation, I asked, is it okay if we go live? And I didn't notify you of that. So we did an audio only conversation here today. So now in my workflow, I'm going to be being clear with that. So in the future, and it's not coming as a surprise, but, aside from that sort of encounter, just curious if you have any feedback for me, because I am on a journey myself, trying to become a better podcaster and communicator and podcast host.
You're so good. No, I think that you did really great. I think my only concern is that whole video thing, yeah, that's it. Because there's like, in terms of, I've done so many different podcast interviews, and usually they're not video, at least for me. Once in a while, when it is video, I really do appreciate people saying that. It's particularly if it's going to go live somewhere or if it's going to be posted somewhere else, because there's a lot of representation, particularly now that we're at home. And when I say representation, it means I am like, I have to put like in terms of working for Libsyn, like I have to be put together. If it was just me,
Right.
it would be a little bit different. Not put together to me does not mean like dolled up. It just means not in my PJs. That's it. And then second of all is that it's like my bedroom. So I have to make sure, like whenever I go live, I just make sure that I have appropriate background things happening so that you don't sneak and, look at
Right.
stuff that you're not supposed to. So all of those things I think are important in terms of like privacy, people's privacy. And because believe me, there's times when like I Google stuff and then the comments like, what is that thing that you have over there? Is that the bed? Is that a picture of blah, blah? I'm like, oh my God, how did you even see that?
Right.
So
got it on the big screen, just with their face against it.
Yeah. So I'm just always stunned. So I always have to be mindful of background. And sometimes, I just don't know what it's going to do or where it's going to go in that way.
Yeah.
So
I'll be doing a better job with
Yeah.
that in the future. So I appreciate the feedback. Cool. Well, thanks again. I'll be sharing this. I'll let you know when it goes live, and I will, share everything on the show notes for the website to link to all of your different podcasts, websites, consulting site, and everything else that you do.
Thank you so much.